traction, all division, all location settings. There's high up, high center location system, how we converge our settings, how we speak our minds. Speaker mind, speaker volume, or bass, velocity, and vacuum. That's all lines and acceleration lines of Mach, and how we indicate in our settings. We have to understand how to use it, not just higher levels of our imaginations, but knowing exactly how to use it through the body, a conceptual system. So there's one thing we all have to identify, is knowing exactly how to draw on the mind. The mind itself is a collaboration system that we have to have a force direction of center ops. Puts our communication system all through travel. So in that position lines, a team line sequence, and everybody else in scent lines, distributors in how to get out of paper and come into the mind of paper and see it in process of its paper. Right? So it's a convergent system, the mind of inception itself, which is already set in set travel. So it puts point lines graph in position to all levels at VRAIN, directing ground centers into the balance line, core centers are readjusting. The awakening, the atmospheres, the connection system, all through travel, the intelligent location of its networks, knowing how to modify the body and know exactly how to use its mind through conceptual setting. That puts everything in process of calculation, screen location, adaptation, and service. Now, in that communication system, trees then have position lines of travel, looking at you through equations, right? Set tractions, all direct line condition setting, box triangulation inside, right? Just looking straight at you. All right, let's do that again, but this time let's close the eyes. So when you're closing the eyes, you just get the image that's already set in position that the calculator, the brain's already set in the conversion system, right? So I'm closing my eyes, I see the box, and I see a triangulation inside. Okay, simple, easy, done, without even thinking. So it's a process how we have to start using the mind conception to inception setting location system. It's like you're carrying your phone, and that's all you're seeing is the phone itself, not directing that actually the phone is coming from the mind itself. So everything interprets the mind itself that projects everything of the subposition, operates line, puts everything location, setting, pixelation, graph, everything, hologram that process, communication system, all through travel. So it's very simple to do these things. That's what I need the team to come into that positions, all right? So if you're going to try to understand how to do that line signals, you get in position 1 line, 2 line, 3 lines of travel, okay? Set communication setting again, processing position locations. There's no waiting signal if the brain is already set up through its convergent system. So 1, 2, 3, see? 1, 2, 3. Close my eyes, either way, it doesn't matter, right? Balance position of 1, okay? Says travels and travel in the communication added frames and signal location system all through travel, right? So 1, 2, 3, balance positions of 1, see? No difference. It's balancing both ways. But you understand how to see it, lines of screen adaptation, line calculation, screen lines of 3 weather patterns, processing position of 3 box frames, and travel in the communication center surface. Process line indication 2, 3, 6 over 9, right? Indicate line centers, indicate travels, and direct lines of box frame communication. So everything you do it in the mind line, all right? Now it gets a lot more tricky when you get in more lines of structured design line. So it's easy to get in position locations. So I'm looking at the wall, but I'm not looking at you, but I'm looking at the wall, looking at you, and looking at the paper at the same time. So it's really understanding lines of course, up line signals, down cross locations, flat line surface. So it's an I-line division rotations, triangulation settings, and process. Both side locations, ground centers, process lines of indication underground. See? So I'm looking there and I see a triangulation on the wall. That's how I was able to do it. So I'm doing the projections on the wall, and I see the triangulation. That's what I see through its identity force. So the more you see the I-line centers, you can see everything that lines of windows and frame communication setting and sequence. Process indicates setting. Let's get into the cup. Let's set travels, direct lines of ground. It's got that position and locations, right? And set lines of sequence. Okay. So it's modifying the top and the center and the balance at the bottom, all right? So you're always going to see everything in a window frame, okay? You're always going to see in a north line communication east, west, and south, aligned north, east, west, and south frame, okay? Circulation and rotations all at once, okay? Process and data, positive communication, right? Directing ground centers in sequence. So just get the basic grounds, and it gets a lot more trickier when your schematics get a lot more complicated in the mind. So you're trying to determine what you're saying in that position to the next person. Did you get the image? Copy that? No, I didn't. All right, so you set a triangulation here, right? And you set another triangulation here, copy that, got it, right? There's the signal. That's the balance, right? If not, it's this, beta, okay? So they sent you this, but you got this instead. Positions over the lines of 3, set lines of 6 over 9, off lines of 12, line position off balance, line flux, line communication of 24 scale, set line position of 0 gravity, process lines, underscore line communications and sending transitions over screen, directing ground centers of service, line condition setting, online centers, offline sequence location and separation. Okay? All through triangulation. How we communicate to our mind is the process how we use it through projections, guys. Now, you can have your eyes closed, you can have your eyes open, but it's easy to identify that. I'm looking at line position, there's a 0, okay? Set position location, there's a triangulation inside, right? So you do the same thing again, and the more you focus, you stay in the adaptation of the same frequencies and ground centers. That's how you see locations. So I got the 0 and I got the triangulation inside. See? Easy done, right? Without even thinking. That's what you guys have to start doing. Now it gets more complicated, okay, when you go through circle, triangle, and a box in position on setting locations, right? So it gets a lot more complicated, but what you have to focus on is it brings it in through projection right away. So close my eyes, circle, triangulation, box, position. Okay, inside setting. So there's no difference in everything. You just have to understand the frequencies that you're connecting with each other. So you have to understand how to communicate with your 12 blades to yourself and to each other in that positions. When you're sending messages, it's extremely important you go through 7 window frames. Let's go through that. Settings 3 in position of 4 and 5, 6 and 7 tractions. Okay, that's a lot of signature lines of grounds. All through an open window frame, track calculation lines of flux over screen and 3 centers of travel. Okay, directing lines of pi, directing lines of clocking, screen adaptations of flux. All right. So that's what the team has to come into. Get out of the paper, come into the mind now, right? So it's very simple to understand these things. So I'm looking at you, but I'm thinking of something else. Now, thinking is a process already done through its equation, right? So there's no indication system and you making mistakes. You just come into what you already know. So the convergent system of the mind conceptual setting is putting position locations in fast forward and travel, right? What everything indicates to you is what it is what you're seeing, but how you set the image is through frequencies, right? To send that image and that position from here in setting, this is you, okay, that's you, sending an image, right? Triangulation, all right? Now the person picks it up. Now, if they don't understand it, they're not at that frequency of communication. So obviously you got the wrong number. We have a 7-digit lines, area code of 3, line position 1, line long distance and travel. Set lines of 7 over lines, set position 3 over lines of 10, 10 lines of 12 in sequence. Okay, so your actual phone number is 12-digit frame. Triangulation's a box, into flux over line, inside travel. Okay, so I want you to stand the set lines of 3 over lines, process lines of 3 zeros, process lines of 4 zeros, inside tractions. Okay, modifications over lines of 0, process lines of 0, process lines of 0, process lines of 0, back in traction locations. Okay, and that indication system in tractions, right? So it's really interesting when you come into that positions. So same frequency lines of 3 grounds, 3 surface and travel through triangulation, 3 travels in line condition setting, and set position of 4 lines of setting. There's the 7, there's the pyramid. So it's really interesting how you look at line position, location, and ground centers, powers, and the atmosphere lines in your position of your tubing and travel communication. Directing ground centers, line condition setting to all line centers, line condition setting of tubing, line communication setting to surface. All through indication system, all through calculations. Right? So it's very powerful how you come into that position of 0, 1, and 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4, right? So as you're going through that, you're speaking a higher tone, right? So I'm just trying to get you guys to understand how to go through your center clouds, E clouds, and eternity clouds. Directing lines of 0, equals lines of alpha, alpha lines of beta, beta lines of beta, beta lines of alpha beta, A equals B equals C. So all you're doing is setting lines of communication, setting the tone, and frequency lines of ground. So now you got 0 lines of A, but they all have to connect to each other through wire signatures. That's where it comes to string theory. Direct lines 0, 3 zeros in travel A, B, and C. All right. So that's convergent system, all through brain activity, rotation lines and grounds and calculations, all through your brain. That's what's going on. Okay, inset position. Seconds, minutes, and hours, and change. All right. Flex over line, wires of indication centers. Now you can change course centers of time. Set a tether, rotation line condition setting. Sets an outline screen adaptation system, all through processing with your inhibitors. Ground centers of surface and travel communication metric core. Calculating the ground calculation lines, its primer and set line communication is sequence. Ground calculate modify. Platforms over line centers, on-line sequence lines of panel. Process indicates lines of clocking line 0, rotation lines of surface and travel communication setting calculations. Okay, and then bring it in set travel. Okay, inset locations. Okay, coordinates and settings. There's your Earth. That's your Earth. So you work on the Earth and line centers. Process line indicates security. Process lines of 4 centers, line communication setting, 4 box frames, and travel communications. So you have to truly understand how to work with the Earth and all line signal locations and data travel. Directing 4 lines of flux, arrows of indication setting and travels, endpoint lines of graph and set travel communications. Crossing angles, foreign centers and sequence location setting and travel communication. Bring in a calculation screen lines, adaptations, and attractions. All right. And then once you understand that, you can override the sequence. Let's bring in purple. Everything is illumination, and that's where you come to codecs. How to codify the line centers, your binaries, and rotation surface interactions, all 3 locations. All right, so you're going to work with that, right? Okay, that's out green in center. 3 box frames and set calculations in direction. Okay, and then we change the angles and set travel in direction. Okay, it gets more complicated when you see it from inside travel. Okay, and then you add security line panels, process indication system of pixelation graphs, 4 line signals, 3 line measure, 2 line calculation screen lines, online center lines, and sequence location of 4 sending interactions. Indicate the lines of grounds, lines of panels, and process communication. Circuitry lines, high line signals, location system, all through travel. Directing box frames, security lines of measure, and volume over mass. Outline settings, online sequence, on position location system, power grids, energy grids, and force line communication system, all through traction. So you're working within that setting in rotation of scales and balance of communication system. And then we go into block service, 4 signals, 4 centers, 4 travels, 4 directions, 4 calculations, and 4 screen locations. Okay, now you got a calculation modify. You got your road graph screens, location of indication setting and grounds communication system and traction. Directing wall sequence, outline centers, outline sequence, outline panels, process of indication setting and track locations. Indicate inside and rotation lines and calculation. Okay, and then you work with yourself inside travel, where your body's going through the seconds, minutes, and hours in frame in set positions. All right. And again, you are the observer, looking at everything which you've already done. The more you process yourself, the more it gets easier to see yourself and know exactly how to communicate with yourself, everything out of observation of itself and track. Very powerful stuff, guys, how it observes everything in positions. Much easier to identify that than what you create through the Earth and location. Okay, so circular ends and rounds, goes up and goes down, process lines in circulation and rotation lines of grounds in circuit. Process indicates and sending over flux over here, indicates over here in travel, observers over here, 4 lines of signals, and set communication system all through calculation. So it processes itself all through its windows of indication. All different angles all at once. And then how you bring these things in, it's all through simulation game. So you have to truly understand how to see it in all formation setting, all through traction locations. Okay, and all setting. All right. But you have to understand this position first. Okay. It gets more trickier when you work with 3 lines of indication settings of flux. Try to understand line conditions. Let's start with A. Okay, that's an alpha wave, right? Because it's going up, right? So your voice is going up. Your voice is going up, right? Your voice is going down, right? Your voice is going, right? Just follow the rhythm, follow the pattern, right? So it's much easier as they both stay. There's 5 signatures, line screens. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the highways. Okay, 5 line centers. Alpha, okay, alpha, beta, delta, theta, and omega. Start with that positions, right? All right, so alpha lines. Now you have 1 signature lines of A, cross lines of 0, 1. Okay, 0, 1, cross lines of B over 1, B equals lines of 1, equals lines of triangulation, line condition setting, box, information system. So what I'm creating is an algorithm. Process into flux over line, rotation lines of Fibonacci. Okay, so it's about direct and redirect, going through course lines, setting lines of travel. Direct lines of 1 over lines of sequence, process lines of 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0. Okay, so it gets more complicated. How we communicate back to 0? Cross lines at high centers and 1 over 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0. Okay? And then it goes back to 0, back to 1, back to 2, back to 3, back to 4, back to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Right? So it's direct line signals, process calculates energetic dome, and screen adaptations of flux. Okay? So there's so many ways of doing this through alpha communication system, alpha, delta, theta, and omega. Understanding waving charts, direct lines and ground communication setting, your Schumann resonance. There's your Schumann resonance. Cross communication lines alpha, delta, beta, theta, and set position lines of travel. See that disappear? Gotta do that again. See, you're not ready to see it. Gotta do it again. See, keeps disappearing. There it is. See, disappears, not ready to see because the frequency is too high. So we got an alpha wave. Process lines of 0, 1, process lines of 0, 4, set process lines of 0, 8, and process lines of 0, 10. Set travel and the communication of 2-dimensional sails. 3 signals, 3 grounds, 3 surface, and travel in position lines of progress that puts all communication setting to Earth line. Galaxy shift lines of anomaly, process lines of indication setting, all 3 set position, is operation sequence. Sets travels in point graph communication and clocking communication to Earth. So you're always working with the Earth setting. In indication system interactions and locations, all right? Inside position. So it's very complicated if you don't understand how to use wire signature lines and grounds and set travel. All through setting, all through flux, all through set calculation. All right? That's why you have 13 channels. Now, the more you go up higher, the more you understand the patterns of behavior. So how you turn on a light switch is 0 and positions of 1. Let's start with attractions and locations. Hold on a second, sequence.
We can hear solid. Yeah.
All right, so how we connect with 0 is how we connect with 1. And then once we understand patterns of behavior, we change your voice. And every time we change your voice, everything basically puts positions of balance of patterns recognition and force recognition time frame. So 1 lines of equals lines of 0, 1, process lines of 0, 2, and 0, 3. Okay, now when you stop getting position, you stop speaking, everything goes back to 0, 1, not back to 0. Back to 0 is positions of balance between 2 line signals. That's online signal location system that just goes direct and redirect by back and setting. It doesn't go forward. Going forward is 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3. Processing that. So when you stop speaking, you go back to 0, 1. So you can go up in depth lines, 0 line, process lines 0, 1, process lines of alpha, process lines of beta, process lines of delta, and process lines of theta of communication system interactions. All in setting, right? So all you're coordinating through is 0, 1 platform, docking A, B, online centers, online sequence, location of platform communications, directing lines of flux, over line core centers of communication. Then you go into Earth rotation setting interactions. Okay, and you have a direct line, X T1000 comes in platform, See what you guys are doing, picking up line centers of 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4, 0, 5, and travel. That indicates lines of 4 lines of flux over lines, indicates set position. Sets travels in 3 signatures, 3 grounds of set travel communication highways. Set lines of 6 over lines, 9 over 12, 12 over 24, and platform communication. Bringing in set line of communication sending a travel. Directing ground sending lines of sequence. Sets lines and molecule structure lines of 3, provision lines of cycles and generation screen location system of the simulation. Indicates ground centers, high lines of sequence, platforms over lines, indicates 1 centers of travel. So it gets more complicated now, guys. And set travel communications. 3 roadways and 4 signals, 5 over 6 over 7 over 8 over 12. And then we cross the angles and plus line screen adaptations of travel. The process that indicates the system of the calculations. Okay? Let me bring it in. All through setting. Okay, so we're going to work with that. Change the angles and travel communications and set positions to its Earth. So we're always working with the Earth line. Then we bring in a planetary alignment and solar screen location. Planet over sequence, planet over charge, directing 3 centers of flux over line. Inside outline centers and travel communicate inside outline center location setting calculations. Setting operates line sequence, platitude line 1, indicate grounds. Platitude lines 1, indicate grounds. Platitude line service indicates service and travels in direct locations all through Earth. This is all through Earth. You're doing everything from the Earth now, inside. All through communication setting, all through tractions. Very powerful stuff, guys. How you come into that position, location, measure, and scale. That communication angles and point lines, calculation, screen line, adaptation with surface travel. All through set calculation, Earth and travel communications. All right? It's amazing how you work with inside travel. And all through indications. Right? So as you go into position, you trace in how to use it. It always informs. So once you get a decision line, the process of communication setting changes everything location setting and position of its particle system to acceleration line condition to its thermal. So it's just basically understanding how to use a ruler, how to use the alphabetical system, the letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols. Process in that line communication system, you're always in that position lines of settings. How everything manifests and how everything comes to a balance is to understand how to see a 4-line centers and sequence locations of frame communication setting and travel. And then you work with indication setting, time, measure, and scale, bending, space, and 3 centers of communication. 4 sets 1s, crossover 2, cross lines of 8, cross lines of 6. Sets track location 8 lines of 1, 8 process lines of 2. Indicates over cross line directing ground centers of surface, and process line indicates setting and triangulation. Directing ground centers online sequence location setting. Indicate course centers directing lines of ground communication of surface. Working with that indication setting, here comes your Earth and rotation, surface, and travel. Okay? So, docking 1, docking 2, docking 6, docking 8, docking 12, docking 24. The set positions. Then you change the primer and the primer. You have to change the primer every single time you get in positions to stop speaking. So you're constantly changing seconds, minutes, hours, and frames, and clocking screen adaptations of traction. Then you come into the road graph screen location. Okay, directing ground centers, highlight sequence. But you got 4 indications of roads and travels and 4 graphs, 6 lines of 8, 8 lines of 12 that process communications of angles. Then you come into location grid, online signals, online communication of circuits, and travel communication. In that line centers, rotate the cycles and travel communication lines of angle rotation. Travel point lines of graph to 45 line centers, switch line course centers of travel in that indication system of the calculations. Work with inside line condition setting. Then you bring outline centers. Work with the calculations of the countries you want to work with, line centers and rotation. Indicate where the body's gone through seconds, minutes, and hours, and 24 set lines of sequence and window frames per second per mile through calculation over square root and triangulation position of the program. There's your Earth, working with that inside in set position of seconds, minutes, and hours in frame. Okay? And then you bring it in through calculation. Okay, road graph screens. Now we got to adapt the system line condition setting, cloak and dagger, split lines, 3 travels, point graph, inset lines of communication setting surface. That indicates white graphs, story graph interference. 4 centers, 6 lines of 8 over travel. Okay. Center line operation sequence location sending calculations. Outside travel and then communication. Okay, so you're always working with your Earth. Now this is through a box frame, window frame. Okay. Now I'm going to correlate to time measure, time scale, balance over lines, purple screens over cross line, outside signals locations are road graph screens. Now that indicates 4 lines of flux over lines and indicates the setting over calculations outer space. Blocking 1, 2, 6 lines of 8, 12, and 12, 14 settings lines of travel. Says calculation ground centers of service location system attractions. Okay, and then we outline the signals. Bring in secure lines over line signal location setting and calculations echo sonar, Zulu Fox, Fox line communication lines direct signals and grounds insert. The circuitry line screen adaptation and attraction locations. Change the angles and screen adaptation. Okay. Now indicate ground centers of sequence. We process indications over set rotation and travel communications and directions, all through indication. Okay. And then we work with inside line connection setting to its structure of division. Okay, so, and then we colorate the lines. Now, you can bring the forestries in, you can bring the water sequence in, it all depends what you want to do. Your specific, how you bring things in travel. That gets in communication setting, how you see Earth and rotation service and travel communications and directions. All through setting, all through operation. Okay? But you have to have the grounds, and you have 3 provisional lines of circuits and travel communications. That indicates the system is lines of calculation. Okay, so I'm just showing you circulation, rotation lines of grounds. How you kind of mapping system, line connection system, all through convergence system. Starting off with 0, 1, and expanding location setting to set attractions. And then we come into blue surface lines. Now, if you're not perceiving anything, you're only bringing in things what you want to bring in. If not, nothing's there. And set lines of communications. Water sequence, water panels, high setting lines of travel, direct lines of line connection system, all through calculation setting. Okay? The Earth itself. Working with inside travel communication. Working with water containment system lines of calculation setting. All right? So it's very powerful when you understand what you're doing. All set calculations. Every second, minute, and hour line of frames is screen lines adaptation with systems, all through attractions and locations. Okay? It's very powerful stuff how you see it in online centers and sequence locations. Okay, I'm just showing how you guys go through black and white and set position of color. Okay? So it's like looking at your Earth through a looking glass. Okay, let's just get in ground centers of 1, and we go outside travel, box frame location setting of surface, and then we'll get 3 scales, 4 settings of communication setting, and set position. All right? Set lines of 3, and set travel. And then we go through location grid outside, inside line condition setting calculation, and then we work with all line rotation, surface, and travel. 3 indicate centers of communication. And again, you're working with inside the Earth rotation setting. Okay? And then you process your countries and what you want to bring in, what you communicate with seconds, minutes, and hours. Okay, so I've just shown you what the body goes through seconds, minutes, and hours in frame. So I know exactly how to communicate to its own system in set directions. All through directions, all through location. Okay? Bring it out, bring it in. That's what you're working with, right? All right, so work with that line centers to an orb line screen, directing set line communication setting to there are 3 centers of travel, direct lines of pi, generation screen locations. Sets course centers into half pipe. That's 1/6 over line, 1/3 over measure. Scales communication lines and metric meters over line rotations, and travel endpoint graphs in that position into its box frame, window frame, and travel. Okay, inside travel and that communication system. So every time you get positioned, you automatically need a highway. Grounds, powers, and atmospheres. Each scale has a communication setting of travel. Okay, and then you bring it in set positions. That's what you're working with the line set location with Earth. So it's inside travel, Echo, Sonar, Zulu. Okay, see the highway settings, process indication grounds and high lines of signal, location setting of flux. Okay, and again, you're working with your Earth. All right. So if we get a true understanding how this all works, you get a better understanding how to put this all together and travel. But there's so many mechanisms that we have to start identifying is how we want to see everything from below, or how you want to see things above. So below lines of 0, cross lines of 1. Cross lines of 0, 1. Okay, 0, 1 equals the lines of 0, 2, back to 0, 1. Okay, not 0. Okay, 0 is here in travel. So as you go faster, you're coordinating in position at energetic tone line. So as that indicates system, it processes the clocking system of 0 correlation setting into flux over line into infinity rotation setting of yin and yang. Okay, which is its position of its panels, propellers, and rotation location system through atom rotation line of attractions. So it's very powerful how you see that line communications. That is your Earth. So your Earth can modify anything in travel, inside travel communications, but you automatically need a road graph to indicate everything grounds, powers, and atmospheres, guys. You need a road graph every single time because that's what you're working with in provision. Okay, every single time. Because if you don't have a road graph, you definitely don't understand the levels that you're putting yourself into and mechanisms, force recognition, 3 centers of grounds, 4 centers of scales, 5 line communications, and set track location. Understand the platforms and the bedding system that you process in the angles of flux line. Then you come into your inhibitors, screen adaptation settings, process line in and position lines of setting, all through your pyramids and travel communication, inside tractions. Working with inside communication, right, and directions. And you go from inside and see everything through operation. Okay? Very powerful stuff when you see it in travel. All through platforms, all through indication setting, all line centers. Now you go out signal, that's outer space line, out communication setting, a surface location system, all through travel that sets up webbing lines, that rotates the system all through calculation. Okay? It's that travel communication. Okay? All through setting, all through operation. Now we got a grid line. Process here, 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 and here. It's a contraction. Okay? And then you get a position this way and set lines, operation sequence into a webbing screen adaptation of its ceiling and travel communication. High signal lines of windows and frame communication. Okay? So you can see the floor now, right? You can see the ceiling and you can see the dome. So if you look really close, it's really exciting stuff, right? And then you basically, it's getting a correlation setting of pink. You're here standing in set location of the same. Okay? But you see the ceiling, see the dome, see the floor. So it gets more kinetic to the position of frequency lines of grounds as you come into the Earth line, which is nothing but a hologram. You can get in a skyline grid. Process that line condition setting to blue. Colored in blue. Like this in traction. Okay. Amazing stuff you can do. So the more you see yourself in the sim, the more you see yourself in track locations. Set positions. Okay? Because it just brings in the volume when you bring in color. I got to get you guys out of snowy graph, but first you have to identify the mind first and how to indicate positions, sending messages to each other through its mind, of its frame, of its window. It's that position. Okay? So it just goes in more detail in that line communication setting as service, the tune communication lines are balanced. So it's a lot of fun. What you're indicating setting, how you see yourself in seconds, minutes, and hours, as you're changing mechanical location of travel, so through clocking of foundations. All through setting, all through tractions. The ceiling. Okay, let's get in the energetic dome. Set travel here, positions, operation lines of sequence. Set position. Crossing angles. What can I say? So you start to recognize everything that's going around the system, right? And then you bring it out. Okay, so now you can really see it, right? And as you're going in position, you're expanding yourself. Modulation of overlying centers. Echo screens, tango, tango, foxtrot, echo, zulu, flux. So your drawings just become more complicated of your communication setting of your earth line. It gets you in communication how you see yourself, and grounds, powers, and atmospheres and locations. Come in your highways and travel. If it's indication system, all through calculations. All through directions, all through location. Okay. Now you can change the angle. See, there's another platform. Okay, so I set positions here. Set calculation lines, orange, over line sequence. Now I'm here in set position. Okay. So, you know, I mean, it's just truly saying how you see yourself. Now the ceiling, it's at travel. You're here, but you're upside down. All right. And look what you can work with, all through expanding, and its expansion. All through its frames, all through its communications and set travel. That indicates your settings. All right. Cross of indications setting, there's a triangulation there. Indicate lines of grounds. Now you get illumination ground communications, outside, inside line condition setting calculation. Okay, creating platforms. But it's constant when you have your earth line, you have to create a grid because you have to be understanding because you have to see yourself on the grid and set travel. Okay. And set position to its settings all through frequency. All through setting, all through the ceiling and travel. Another ceiling, right? Working with another ground set set lines communication system all through traction. 45 angles, 4 lines of communications and interaction locations. Bring it out and set travel communications, right? It's amazing things you can create in that communication system all through your earth. All through your earth. And then you know exactly what countries you're going to work with in set lines. Bring them in set line communication. All through setting, all through operation. Okay? See it at different angles too, which is absolutely amazing. So I'm just showing you so many ways and forms how you see your earth information. Different angles, different points, different graphs, different time frames, different travels, different indication systems, all through calculation setting. But you're always working within the set lines, circulation, rotation lines, guys. So the more you mind adapt your system, the more you understand how to use it in flux. Let's set a triangulation A flux. A equals lines of flux. Okay, travels point lines is 0. Cross lines is 0, 1. Set position of 0. Okay. And its conversion system, also the brain calculation setting, it's set calculation to its cloud. Working with the cloud. All right, so you got 3 lines of angles. 2 centers offline center in rotation of graphs. Indicate ground centers as sequence. And 2 set travel communication. Okay. So you're working with that in settings all through operation. All right, and then you get in this position. There's your earth inside. You're working with everything inside your earth. Okay, and then you bring it in. Okay, so work within that, right? And again, you see yourself on the simulation board. The more you get in position of observing, the more you see yourself in travel. This is you observing everything you're seeing yourself doing in set positions. It's operation. Okay? So that's how you see your earth and all formations. And again, you bring in the countries you want to bring in set line communication. Now you decide what you want to do, but make sure you put jump scars in So you can go back there anytime and set sequence. All through setting, all through operation. Okay? Again, that line settings. Look at that. Whoa. So you work with inside setting, but you need the grounds, the structure. All through set position. Okay, and then you bring it in and you work with that on different angles. Okay, how you want to work with that? You want to bring in XD1000, XD1000 comes in, you set lines, and set travel. Okay, picks this up. You know what you're doing through structure of drawing, the Z lines of communications and settings. Cross indication picks it up. Right? This is all happening in your seconds, minutes, and hours and frame, guys. And it automatically goes off the chart waves into positions and settings to its operation setting. Auto communicates the setting convergence into half pipe and travel. Okay, now look at that in set positions. Look what you're bringing in. So it's a lot more structure line. That's how I want you to get positions. This is your test. I want you to get created through your earth line now, because that's the frequency you guys are at in setting. Process indication centers. X24 comes in. It's an X24. So that's communications, travels through the half pipe and out through equation. Okay, so there's so much activity going around your earth and on different location settings into calculation. Right? You're processing that at all different angles and travel. Look at that through creation. Absolutely amazing when you see that. Right? And then you color it in. Okay, so the more you go in position, the more you send geometrics and its directions and its location system interactions. Bring in the water sequence, bring in the forestries and the grounds of center line circuits and travel communication. Drawing Earth is who you are. So you have no problem drawing that, but you have to understand what you're drawing is your provisions comes in set travel communications. Right? And understand how to indicate the grounds. It's obviously brown, guys. And then you basically understand how to use your vortex lines, screen adaptations, and travel. Remember, it's online connection setting to change your set lines. That's what you have the body is. Your body mutates the grounds in sequence, process indicates the setting and calculation. Now, the actual Earth itself forms itself in multi-levels of its dimensions of itself. So it's never in one frame, never in one traction, never in one division, never in one frequency, because it's moving too fast and set travel. But there's the Earth that you're working with in all different angles. Okay? Gets more colorful when you really get it in. And then you get into grids. Okay, outline signals. Let's bring it in a little bit more so you can see it in bold and volume all through set traction. Okay, and you cross the angles. Set travel communications. Okay, so that's what you're working with. Set position. And you can bring your security panels. Security panels are box frames. So you can put a triangulation here on center inside location. Okay, but it overrides everything you're going in position of existing on frame. Okay. Now everything you put in your settings, know exactly what you're doing to travel. Set communication. Okay, bring it out, move it around, set travel communication. Right, so arrows, indication centers, cross lines, inside travel communication. And then we get another line position of triangulation over here, triangulation over here, and triangulations over here. So each time I put in a triangle, it's a different pyramid. Now you can add pyramids in that equations, but they all have to be connected through magnetic force as set lines of sequence locations all at once. That indicates all communication setting and communication system all through tractions. But look what you create through all anomalies of your simulation grounds of your Earth and travel. Amazing stuff. Okay? So the more you identify that, it's much easier to see your Earth now, right? Seeing your Earth from above and below. But what's above is what's below. What's below is what's above, right? In that position, you start with snowy graph interference, black and white. Then you come into on position, locations, and interactions, all through color and directions. As your Earth is constantly changing and rotating its system, all through track locations. All right. So hopefully you guys get a true understand how this all works with alpha, delta, theta, and omega, zeta. And know exactly how to indicate that through the Earth. And basically how to set the avatar, how the avatar sees itself as its Earth, as it's rotating itself. But see, the thing is, once it identifies itself, identifies its Earth, is a separation of itself into infinity in set position. So it's you against you, right? This is the conscious of everything, and this is you, the conscious of you. Right? Understanding that is a process how you use that through yin and yang. It's all communication lines of balance of face recognition. Face recognition, see? Face recognition. Then you see outline sequence and 3 centers of measure, 3 centers of scales, and 4 communication setting interactions. Directing ground centers and line communication setting of surface locations. All right. Online sequence, online panels, process lines of platforms, 4 centers of set location system and calculation. Right? So every time, and you're always working with inside the Earth. Everything works with inside the Earth, guys. It's very simple to understand these things. Okay, so the Earth can be any shape, any module, any time, any positions, anything clocking. The Earth itself could just be a clock. All through pi. That's your Earth. But you have to have grounds and set position. Okay? You have to have the grounds. Okay? And now whatever you do, you put it in line. So you can outline signals outside your frame of your Earth. But you got to be very careful of that, because now you're working with outer space, which is just the void itself and travel. So once you get into that, you're working with the portals inside, rotates the cycles and traffic inside line connection setting. Process that, location grid, inside locations, and security lines of panels of operation. Right? But you're always working with inside settings and position of your Earth outside track locations. Right? But your Earth is constantly changing its form, second, minutes, and hours in frame. So it's a triangle, it's a box, it's a circle, it's a clock, it's a pie, it's a structure of a building. It can be anything at once in set position, right? But the face itself is you. That doesn't change. That's you, observation, looking you all at once in set travel. Okay? So, you get a true understand how this all works, then you get a true understand how to use that through set position, your simulation. All through modifications and settings, all through attractions, all through locations. Okay, very powerful stuff. Okay, so you have to really understand how to set up the grounds, powers, and the atmospheres. Okay, all through a box, all through a window frame. All right, but you're always working in that positions of its Earth itself. Okay, now why it's this is because it's you. It's actually you. You are the face of everything. Right? So the actual Earth is a circulation and a rotation system. But it can morph into anything that it sees, anything it travels inside in position. Right? So you need the grounds right away in set lines of sequence. Then you get in positions of the powers in set line of communications. There's the energetic dome and you inside in the simulation game that you put yourself in projection. Inside, right? But you're still working with Earth, and then the body's been through all this set lines of countries, bring the countries in and travel, and set positions. Okay? But look at that. There's your Earth. That's how it works. But the face itself is you, which is the Earth itself. So, I don't want anybody to get confused in that. Any way and form how we see things in set positions through its operation sequence. Okay? That's it through connections. And that line centers, high position locations. Unison, debris from room is going to be in the cerebral cortex. Classification A, level C. Adios.